Entrepreneur means changing the pattern, the system, the frame of thinking. Social means that the person from deep within is committed to the good of all, and therefore so is the work. Social entrepreneur.
Hi, I'm Katel Le Goulven, and this is Mission to Change, the show where I hear from people who turn business into a force for good and learn about their journey to make it happen. Welcome to our third season, and it will focus on social entrepreneurship. We'll go back to the origins of the social entrepreneur movement. We'll explore how to fund social enterprises, how to scale them, and how to measure their impact. We'll hear from entrepreneurs, researchers, as well as from those supporting them. In our very first episode of this season, we speak with Bill Drayton, who coined the term social entrepreneur back in the 70s. He also founded Ashoka in 1980. Ashoka identifies and supports the world's leading social entrepreneurs and champions the everyone a changemaker world.
Hi, I'm Bill Drayton. I've been a social entrepreneur since elementary school, and I help lead Ashoka, everyone a changemaker, which is the world's association of leading social entrepreneurs working together so that we all have the ability to give, which is what brings a good life.
Bill is often referred to as the father and founder of social entrepreneurship. Before him, the term social entrepreneurs didn't even exist. It doesn't mean that there were no social entrepreneurs, but until 1972, they were not identified as such.
When I was 19, with three friends, we drove to India from Munich because we couldn't afford the plane flight. And with introductions to some of the leading Gandhians, Jayaprakash Narayan, Vinoba Bhave, and others, and with India being extraordinarily welcoming, we learned a lot. And the statistics became people that we knew. If you're an entrepreneur and you see that this huge 100-to-1 difference in incomes and what that means, you got to do something. And so what is the most powerful force in the world? It's a big pattern change idea, but only if it's in the hands of a great entrepreneur. And so we said, well, that's something even we, as very lowly rising sophomores, well, we might be able to do this. By the early 70s, we were plotting and planning, and language was a problem because this was a concept that people didn't have. And when we tried to explain what we were talking about, people would say things like, oh, that's an oxymoron, social entrepreneur. So we had to come up with language, and we experimented with several different words, phrases, and ultimately that's the one that we still got glassy eyeballs and people looking at us quizzically because it was so new, but it really does the best job of explaining the idea. And the meaning is really simple. Entrepreneur means changing the pattern, the system, the frame of thinking. Social means that the person from deep within is committed to the good of all, and therefore so is the work. Social entrepreneur.
You've written about the evolution of first entrepreneurship in general and then of the social entrepreneurship movement. And for the latter in particular since the late 70s and early 80s. So can you unpack that for our listeners a little bit and explain what are the trends that congregated then to really grow the social entrepreneurship movement?
Well, the emergence of social entrepreneurship is part of a deeper historical process. And it is just reaching the culminating turning point years now. In the old world, people did repetitive things. You got a skill and you repeated it for life in work structures that were designed for repetition. But around 1700, that started to change. And it has ever since, the rate of change and the degree and extent of interconnection, those two forces, each feeding the other, have been accelerating faster and faster. Business did something very radical. It said, if you have a better idea and you make it work, we're going to make you rich and happy and respected. And by the way, we're going to copy you. And that is what drove the escalating growth in income. And around the late 70s, we saw that the time for the social half of the world's operations to make the transition structurally to competition, to entrepreneurship, had arrived. And that was simply because the citizen sector had been dependent on government. The government got a lot of resources, all this new wealth that could take some of it away without people even noticing. And so it grew and grew, and it paid for the citizen sector. And as a monopoly, it didn't want competition, so it told us, don't compete. And therefore, we fell further and further behind in squalor. When I graduated from college, only 11 people out of 1,200 in my class went into our sector because it was so pathetic. Now it's the largest single student group at Harvard Business School, bigger than marketing, bigger than finance.
Engaging with this nascent movement, Drayton went on to found Ashoka in 1980. The company was based on the idea that the most powerful force for good in the world is a social entrepreneur, meaning a person driven by an innovative idea that can help correct an entrenched systemic problem.
Our first objective in terms of framework change was to get the construct of social entrepreneurship into the language. And what that means is that everyone across the world at least knows there is a possibility. If I have an idea, I care, I organize, that's a feasible thing to do. And I can see the other people doing it, and there are now institutions. And very few people are going to be social entrepreneurs, but everybody must be a change maker because everything is changing faster and faster. And everyone is a member of more and more groups that are bigger and bigger and more interconnected and more complex, and they have to be able to contribute to that change, to deal with it, to adapt to it. So everyone a change maker is our second major framework change, but it comes right out of the first one. So building the construct of social entrepreneurship was our first framework change, and that was a completely conscious process.
And so this framework change were basically building the theory of change of Ashoka that was created in 1981. What were the other elements of that theory of change?
Well, the first core step is global open sourcing for the best big pattern change ideas in the hands of truly extraordinary social entrepreneurs. It's that combination that drives history. And so we're very good at finding that combination. Our minimum standard is that this idea and this person, we believe, is going to change the pattern in the field, health, environment, human rights, whatever, at least at a continental level. We have a 5-step selection process. First of all, there has to be a big new idea, pattern changing idea for the good. And the person has to have the personal qualities to make that idea happen, at least at a continental level. So the first is the new idea. The second is creativity, both in goal setting and problem solving. Then entrepreneurial quality, and this requires a little explanation.
Yeah.
It is not getting things done. It is not leadership. There are lots and lots of people who can do that. It is a vision of how the world should be different. And that's not a poem. There are many idealists who have visions, but entrepreneurs have a vision, but they also have a deep how-to map. They're always asking. And if something isn't working, they want to know that immediately, and then they change their approach, the environment, their ideas. So the how-to test is really key. And when you ask how-to questions and press to the second, third, fourth level, the idealists drop out. They just keep telling you what's going to do, what's going to be like. But the entrepreneurs, first they're surprised, and then they really engage. And you can see the wheels turning. So another dimension of entrepreneurial quality is that they listen. They are not captive of ideology. They do not respect any of the stovepipe or little box walls. To get to that vision, I'm going to take everything into account. So the pattern of what you're looking for is really clear. The next criterion is the social impact of the new idea. So imagine that the entrepreneur has created a demonstration of the idea, and then the entrepreneur disappears. Is the idea going to spread with ordinary people in the field saying, oh, that's a really good idea, let's try that here? And then the final criterion is a complete knockout. It's utterly central. It's ethical fiber. And this is something we all have the ability to detect. Cannot build a community, a network, if people don't trust one another, aren't safe with one another. If you don't have ethical fiber, nothing works.
Ashoka's 5-step selection criteria are clear. They refer to the key skills all social entrepreneurs possess. Using these criteria, Ashoka has built a community delivering global results.
All over the world, year after year, we get the same results. And we test this very regularly. And it's like 3/4 have changed the pattern in their field at the national and international levels. 90% are continuing lifelong, pursuing their vision. And 97% are continuing in our field. If you're doing this, why on earth would you ever want to do something else?
How do you see this growing movement of social entrepreneur and change makers operating in the broader landscape of institutions? In particular, how do they operate with, let's say, more classic business?
It's very straightforward. You've got to make sure that every single person on your staff, and more broadly, your suppliers, your customers, anyone that you really care about in your ecosystem, you have to help them all be change makers fast. And second, you have to organize as a fluid, constantly changing, open, integrated, purposive, a team, singular, of teams, of teams. You don't have a choice, because if you don't do that, change makers don't want to work with you. If you don't do that, you can't connect with the rest of the world that's organized that way. Now, if a business school is doing strategy and doesn't understand this, or doing organization and isn't focused here, there is a big problem.
Right? I mean, those who are missing that wave will probably not be existing in the coming years, if I hear you correctly. It's part of these big transitions.
Exactly. And this is not easy. Any organization, especially a big organization,
Yeah.
it's hard to go through a big fundamental change.
Mm-hmm.
All the forces of inertia, the politics, etc., which is why so very few of the Fortune 500 companies of 30 years ago still exist. And the rate of change now is so much faster, and it's accelerating.
When you say it's accelerating, for you, what are the key trends that will shape this change in the coming 5 or 10 years? These key accelerating factors for the changemakers movement to grow?
Well, any major change goes through a very typical process. There's a long period where you don't see the change because people are figuring it out,
Mm-hmm.
the people who are going to drive it. The second stage is getting the early adopters.
Mm-hmm.
And we've now completed that stage. And I'll give you one key measure. We invented the phrase, the word changemaker, in the spring of 1981, sitting at Nariman Point in Bombay. The first time it made it into a dictionary was less than 10 years ago. And now it's everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
Why? Because people need it.
Right.
When you have 1% who are moving, they're affecting everyone else. The next stage, which is what we're entering now, is the turning point years. And that's when 80% join the 1%. The transition from 1% to 80% is very fast. And you can look at the women's movement, the American Civil Rights Movement, the Indian National Independence Movement. It's the same pattern. We are now at the transition from the 1% to the 80%, and things are going to go really fast. And companies that don't see it are going to be left behind. And that's going to be very, very costly. Those who do see it, they're going to be the industry leaders.
My final question to you is really directed at our students and our alumni listening to you here and who want to become change makers. What is the message that you want to leave with them? To push them in that direction.
Well, anyone who is at or is an alumnus of INSEAD can make a really big difference in helping lead the world through this change. And that is a huge opportunity for you and any organization in any sector with which you are associated. It could be a business, a citizen group, a union, a university. Every organization has a huge opportunity. The other thing I would say is have confidence. Don't be afraid. Lots of people will still tell you, no, you can't do that. That's not realistic. What that really means is that they didn't do that in their life. And it makes them uncomfortable to think that you might. So be very polite, but just don't listen. You can't. You look at the work of the great social entrepreneurs, it's not astrophysics. They have seen a problem. They gave themselves permission to, I can solve this problem. And then they figured it out. And like every entrepreneur, every day, that didn't quite work. We've got to adjust this. It's a continuous process of iterative listening and creation and listening again. But you got to give yourself permission and find the other change makers.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Mission to Change, a podcast by the INSEAD Hoffman Global Institute for Business and Society in collaboration with Intent. If you liked what you heard, please follow, download, and subscribe to the show. Our podcast was created and produced by Human Humans. Original sound, music, and mixing by Palomino. Coordination, research, and script editing by Isabel Stark. You can find me on LinkedIn at Ketel Gulven, where you can leave me a message about what you liked and what you learned.